Right. So today we're going to take a deep dive into Turkey.
Okay.
You might have caught like snippets of this in the news,
Yeah.
but probably haven't had time to fully unpack it.
Right.
Turkey's really rapidly evolving role on the world stage.
Yeah.
And we're not just talking about a regional power here. We're
No.
talking about a country with some serious global ambitions, and they're backing it up.
Mm-hmm.
We've got reports on their military expansion,
Right.
economic strategies,
Yeah.
how they're kind of maneuvering
Right.
between all these major powers.
Oh, it's fascinating. It's a very complex situation for sure.
Yeah.
Um, I think what we're seeing is a country that is actively reshaping its position in the 21st century
Yeah.
with aims that are both impressive and frankly raising eyebrows in a lot of capitals around the world.
Yeah, and while this whole idea of geopolitics might sound a little bit dry at first,
Yeah.
I promise you there's some truly fascinating stuff here. Like, did you know that Turkey is now sending troops to over a dozen countries around the world?
Yeah. It's really something.
And we're not talking about peacekeeping missions,
No.
actual boots-on-the-ground deployments.
Right.
We're talking Somalia,
Hmm.
Libya,
Yeah.
and more.
Yeah.
What's the story there?
Well, to understand that we kind of need to look at what is driving this shift from a largely defensive posture
Okay.
to a much more assertive one that we're seeing today.
Mhm.
And there's this doctrine that's being talked about a lot these days called the Blue Homeland.
Okay.
And it essentially lays claim to Turkish dominance
Okay.
in the Mediterranean and Black Seas.
Wow.
So think, control of maritime routes, access to resources, that sort of thing.
Okay, so they're not just building up their military, they've got a whole strategic vision behind it.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, and how's that playing out in practice? Because, claiming dominance and actually achieving it, those are two very different things.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, absolutely. And we are seeing that play out in a number of ways. I mean, you see disputes with Greece over territorial waters.
Yep.
You see exploration rights clashing with Cyprus.
Uh,
Even tension with NATO allies over Turkey's actions in Syria.
Yeah.
So, the Blue Homeland doctrine is a major factor in how Turkey is approaching its relationships in these different areas.
Mm-hmm. Now, on top of the troop deployments, there's another thing that's been catching everyone's attention.
Yeah.
Those Turkish-made Bayraktar drones.
Right.
They seem to have become almost like a celebrity in the world of military tech.
They have. Yeah.
But beyond the hype, what's their real impact?
Yeah.
How are they shifting the balance of power on the ground?
Yeah. I mean, it's not just hype.
Okay.
They really have been game changers.
That's interesting.
What makes them so significant is this combination of effectiveness
Okay.
and affordability.
Okay.
And so we're seeing smaller nations now able to challenge much larger adversaries
Right.
in ways that were just unimaginable a few years ago. And the fact that Turkey is exporting these drones pretty widely, it adds a whole other layer to their growing influence.
So we're talking about a country that's not only expanding its own military capabilities, but it's also equipping others to kind of challenge the existing power dynamics as well.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
All of this military expansion has to be expensive, though.
Yeah,
Right?
that's absolutely.
How's Turkey's economy managing to keep up with all of this? Can they actually afford to be this ambitious?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the answer's a little complicated. I mean,
Yes.
on the one hand, they're facing some serious economic headwinds, right?
Yeah.
Inflation, currency fluctuations, you name it.
Right.
But, on the other hand, they are making some very strategic investments.
Strategic in what sense? What are they focusing on?
Well, a couple of things stand out.
Right.
One is they're pushing really hard for energy independence,
Okay.
which is a long-term game, right?
Yeah.
But one with potentially huge payoffs.
Right.
They've made some significant discoveries of natural gas in the Black Sea,
Okay.
and they're determined to exploit those resources.
So they're not just buying weapons. They're actually trying to build a more solid economic base to support this.
Right. They're playing the long game.
Okay, but energy independence is just one piece of the puzzle.
It is, yeah.
What else are they doing?
Well, they're also pouring resources into infrastructure projects
Okay.
that are aimed at positioning Turkey as this critical trade hub.
Okay.
Think of it as a modern-day Silk Road strategy.
Okay.
One example is this massive Iraq Development Road project,
Okay.
railways and highways connecting Turkey to the Gulf,
Wow.
potentially reaching all the way to Asia.
Okay, that's a bold play to
Yeah.
reshape global trade routes.
It is, yeah.
But it also sounds incredibly expensive.
Oh, for sure.
Are these projects realistic, or are they just pie in the sky?
It's too early to say for sure.
Okay.
But what's clear is that Turkey is thinking big.
Yeah.
And they're not afraid to kind of bet on their own future.
It's definitely a gamble.
Yeah.
But one that potentially has massive payoffs if they can pull it off.
Absolutely.
So they're building up their military. They're making these big economic bets.
Mm.
But how does Turkey actually fit into the existing global power structure?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
I mean, they're walking this very fine line between all these different alliances and interests.
Yeah.
On the one hand, they're a NATO member.
Right.
But their actions often clash with Western priorities.
I mean, we saw that with their involvement in Syria.
Absolutely.
Definitely caused some friction with their NATO allies.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
At the same time, they're forging these strategic partnerships with countries like Qatar, deepening ties with Russia, and even expanding their presence in Africa.
Wow.
So it's this complex web of relationships, and they're trying to kind of leverage each one to their advantage.
So it's not just about military strength or economic clout.
Right.
It's also about kind of playing the diplomatic game.
Exactly.
Knowing when to push, when to compromise.
Yeah.
But there's another factor at play here that I'm curious about.
Yeah.
The legacy of the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
How much does that historical baggage actually influence Turkey's modern ambitions?
It's hard to overstate the importance of the Ottoman legacy in Turkish identity. It's a source of national pride on the one hand.
Okay.
But it also informs this sense of historical grievance, this feeling that Turkey was kind of unfairly diminished after World War I.
So there's this sense of wanting to reclaim their rightful place on the world stage.
Yeah.
Not just as a regional power, but as a global force to be reckoned with.
That's one way to look at it, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a perspective that resonates with, a significant portion of the Turkish population.
Okay, so we've got this picture of a country that's flexing its muscles.
Yeah.
Making these big moves on the economic front. And playing a very strategic game on this diplomatic chessboard.
It is. It's high stakes.
But what does this all mean for the average person? Why should we care about what's happening in Turkey?
That's the key question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the answer is that Turkey's rise has implications that extend far beyond its own borders.
Okay, in what sense? Give me some concrete examples.
Well, for one thing, their growing economic clout and their focus on becoming a trade hub could create some significant opportunities for businesses and investors around the world.
Yeah.
But at the same time, their assertive foreign policy and their willingness to challenge the status quo could also lead to increased instability and conflict in the region.
So there's a potential upside, but also pretty significant downside.
There is, yeah.
Depending on how things play out.
Exactly. And that's why I think it's so important to understand what's driving Turkey's actions,
Right.
what their goals are, and what the potential consequences might be. Because what happens in Turkey doesn't stay in Turkey.
Right.
It has the potential to impact all of us,
Yeah.
whether we realize it or not.
When we started this deep dive, I thought we'd be talking about a regional power trying to punch above its weight.
Right.
But it's becoming clear that Turkey's playing a much bigger game here. One with global implications.
They are. And it's a game that's only just begun.
Yeah.
Buckle up.
All right. Well, we'll have to leave it there for now, but we'll be back soon to continue this deep dive into Turkey's rise.
Looking forward to it.
It really is fascinating to see how Turkey is leveraging its position, not just in their immediate neighborhood, but further afield. You mentioned their growing presence in Africa earlier.
Yeah.
I hadn't really considered that dimension before. What's the strategy there?
Okay.
Is it purely economic?
Yeah.
Or is there something more to it?
It's definitely multifaceted. I mean, on the economic front, they're looking for new markets, investment opportunities, access to resources, that sort of thing.
Right.
But there's also a geopolitical angle to it.
Okay.
Turkey really sees Africa as a region where it can expand its influence.
Okay.
And kind of build partnerships that aren't tied to the, traditional Western powers.
So in a way, they're stepping in to avoid offering an alternative to the established players.
Exactly. And they're doing it in a way that's been quite effective. I mean, they're investing in infrastructure, providing aid, building diplomatic ties. They're really positioning themselves as a reliable partner.
Okay.
And that's resonating with a lot of African countries.
It's interesting to see how they're diversifying their relationships,
Yeah,
not putting all their eggs in one basket.
right.
But let's go back to that energy independence goal for a moment.
Okay.
We talked about those Black Sea gas discoveries,
Mm-hmm.
but is that enough to really make them a major player in the energy sector?
It's a big step in that direction,
Okay.
but they're not stopping there.
Okay.
They're also looking to become a key transit country
Hey.
for energy flowing from the Caspian region to Europe.
Mm.
So think pipelines, infrastructure deals, that sort of thing.
So they're not just aiming for self-sufficiency.
Right.
They want to be like a hub, a control point for those energy flows in the region.
Exactly.
That sounds ambitious,
It is.
but also potentially risky.
Yeah.
Doesn't that kind of put them in direct competition with some major players?
It absolutely does.
Okay.
And we're already seeing that play out in the Eastern Mediterranean,
Okay.
where, Turkey's assertive claims to those offshore resources
Yeah.
have sparked tension with Greece and Cyprus.
Right.
It's a high-stakes game,
Yeah.
but one that Turkey seems determined to play.
It seems like every move they make has these ripple effects,
It does.
creating opportunities but also sparking all these new tensions.
Yeah, that's the nature of the game, isn't it?
It makes you wonder, what's the end game here?
Right.
Is Turkey aiming to reshape the entire global order?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they just playing a more calculated game
Yeah.
within the existing framework?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's one that's really difficult to answer definitively.
Okay.
I think their actions really suggest a desire for greater autonomy,
Oh.
a rejection of kind of being beholden to any particular power block.
Mm.
They're charting their own course,
Yeah.
and that's bound to disrupt the status quo.
It's definitely a bold approach,
It is.
and one that's keeping everyone guessing.
For sure.
But let's zoom out for a moment and kind of talk about the bigger picture here.
Okay.
What are the long-term implications of Turkey's rise?
Hmm.
How does it impact the global balance of power?
That's a complex question.
Yeah.
And the answer is still unfolding.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing is clear. Turkey is a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
They're a rising power
Yeah.
with a clear vision. And they're not afraid to use all the tools at their disposal
Right.
to achieve their goals.
But they're also facing some serious challenges, right?
Oh, absolutely.
We talked about the economic difficulties.
Yeah.
And then there's this delicate balancing act that they're trying to maintain between all these different alliances.
Right.
It seems like a lot to juggle.
It is. It is. And there are also internal challenges to consider.
Okay.
Political polarization, social tensions, questions about democratic freedoms.
Right.
How they navigate these internal pressures will be crucial in determining whether they can sustain this trajectory of growth and influence.
So it's not a foregone conclusion that Turkey will achieve all of its ambitions.
It's not, no.
There are a lot of potential pitfalls along the way.
There are, yeah. There are many factors at play here, many
Yeah.
potential scenarios.
Right.
But what's undeniable is that they're shaking things up.
Yeah.
They're challenging the existing order,
Mm.
and they're forcing everyone to rethink their assumptions about the balance of power.
It really is a fascinating story to watch unfold.
It is.
It's a reminder that the world is constantly in flux.
Yeah.
And, we need to pay attention to these shifts if we really want to understand the bigger picture.
Absolutely.
But, we've been focusing a lot on the kind of hard power aspects of Turkey's rise.
Huh.
The military, the economics, the geopolitics.
Right.
What about the cultural dimension?
Yeah.
How much of a role does that actually play in their overall strategy?
That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
And one that's often overlooked.
Okay.
Turkey's influence isn't just about military might or economic clout.
Right.
It's also about soft power,
Okay.
the projection of cultural values and ideas.
I've heard people talking about Turkish soap operas being hugely popular
Oh, yeah.
across the Middle East and beyond.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
Is that part of this soft power strategy?
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And these television series,
Yeah.
along with music, cuisine, other forms of cultural expression, they're incredibly powerful tools for shaping perceptions
Yeah.
and building connections with other societies.
So it's not just about tanks and trade deals.
Right.
It's about winning hearts and minds as well.
It is.
Projecting this image of Turkey as a modern, dynamic, and culturally influential nation.
Exactly. And that's a dimension that's often underestimated.
Yeah.
But it can be incredibly potent in the long run.
It's amazing how these different elements, the hard power, the economic influence, and then this soft power, all work together to enhance Turkey's position on the world stage.
They do. It's like a carefully orchestrated symphony,
Yeah.
All these different instruments playing in harmony.
But it's not without its risks.
Right.
Of course not. I mean, this assertive approach, this willingness to kind of challenge the status quo, it's bound to create friction along the way.
It is, yeah. I mean, there's a constant tension between asserting their interests and maintaining relationships with key partners.
Yeah.
It's a delicate balancing act, and it's not always clear that they're getting it right.
So what should we be looking for in the coming years?
Okay.
What are some key indicators of whether Turkey's rise will continue or whether they might stumble along the way?
Well, I think one key indicator will be their economic performance.
Okay.
Can they sustain their growth?
Yeah.
Manage their debt, attract foreign investment.
Yeah.
Because all this geopolitical maneuvering, all this military spending, it has to be backed up by a solid economic foundation.
Right, because if the economy falters, it could really undermine their ability to kind of project power and influence.
Absolutely.
What else should we be paying attention to?
Another key indicator will be their ability to manage their relationships with other countries.
Okay.
Can they maintain their strategic autonomy without alienating key partners?
Right.
Can they navigate this complex web of alliances and rivalries in the region?
Because they've got a lot of balls in the air right now. A lot of different relationships to kind of juggle.
Yeah. And if they overplay their hand, if they push too hard in one direction or another, it could backfire and lead to isolation.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, that balance between assertiveness and diplomacy.
Precisely. And that's a delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
Especially in a region as volatile as the Middle East.
Right.
But beyond those external factors, there's also this crucial question of domestic stability.
Right. We've talked about those internal challenges they're facing.
Right.
The political polarization, the economic pressures, the questions about human rights.
Yeah, all of that.
How they handle those issues will ultimately determine their long-term success.
Absolutely. A country's strength ultimately derives from the strength of its own society.
Yeah.
Its own people. And if there's this loss of faith in the government, or if the social fabric starts to fray, it could undermine everything they're trying to achieve on the international stage.
So we're watching a country at a crossroads.
We are.
Facing both opportunities and challenges, both internal and external.
Yeah.
It's a complex and fascinating story.
It is.
And one that's still being written.
Indeed. And it's a story with global implications.
Yeah.
What happens in Turkey doesn't stay in Turkey.
Right.
It resonates throughout the region and beyond, impacting everything from trade routes to security alliances to the flow of energy.
It really does touch on everything.
It does.
Yeah.
Understanding Turkey's trajectory is crucial for anyone who wants to grasp the dynamics shaping the 21st century.
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
It's incredible to think about how much ground we've covered in this deep dive. From military deployments and drone technology to economic strategies and cultural influence.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It really paints this picture of a country on the move.
Yeah.
One that's not content to just sit on the sidelines.
No, not at all.
But, as we've discussed, there are a lot of potential pitfalls on this path they've chosen.
Right.
What do you see as the biggest risks for Turkey moving forward?
Well, I think one of the biggest risks is overreach. They've got a lot of ambitious goals, becoming a major energy hub, reshaping trade routes, asserting their dominance in the region.
Right.
But trying to do too much too quickly could backfire.
Okay.
It could strain their resources, alienate potential partners, and lead to a lot of unintended consequences.
It's that classic case of biting off more than you can chew.
Exactly.
So they need to be strategic, prioritize their goals, and make sure they have the capacity to follow through.
Yeah, for sure.
What else should they be wary of?
Another risk is internal instability.
Okay.
We've talked about the economic challenges, the political polarization, the social tensions.
Right.
If those pressures continue to mount, it could create an environment where their ambitious foreign policy becomes unsustainable. Public support could erode.
Right.
And they could find themselves facing challenges both at home and abroad.
It's a reminder that a country's strength ultimately depends on the strength of its own society.
It does, yeah.
You can project power outward. But if you neglect the foundations at home, it can all crumble.
Absolutely.
What about external threats?
Okay.
Are there any particular countries or groups
that
pose a significant risk to Turkey's ambitions?
Well, There are always potential adversaries.
Yeah.
Especially in a region as volatile as the Middle East.
Of course.
But I think the bigger threat is not so much from a specific actor, but from a general climate of instability and uncertainty. You know, the world is becoming increasingly multipolar.
Yeah.
With shifting alliances and a breakdown of the old order.
Right.
In that kind of environment, it's easy to miscalculate, to make moves that trigger unintended consequences.
So they need to be agile, adaptable,
right,
and able to navigate a complex and ever-changing landscape.
Exactly.
What advice would you give Turkish policymakers if you had the chance? What should they be focusing on to maximize their chances of success?
I think the most important thing is to prioritize domestic stability and economic resilience. They need to address the concerns of their own people. Build a more inclusive and equitable society. And create a strong and diversified economy that can withstand external shocks. That's the foundation upon which everything else rests.
It's back to that idea of building a strong base at home before you try to project power abroad.
Exactly.
What about their foreign policy? How should they approach their relationships with other countries?
I think they need to strike a balance between assertiveness and diplomacy. It's important to stand up for their interests. But they also need to be pragmatic, build alliances, and avoid unnecessary confrontations. They need to be seen as a reliable partner, not as a disruptive force.
It's about choosing their battles wisely.
It is.
Knowing when to push and when to compromise.
Exactly.
Any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into Turkey's rise?
Yeah, I think the key takeaway here is that Turkey is a country at a crossroads. They have the potential to become a major player on the world stage, but they also face significant challenges. Their success will depend on their ability to manage those challenges effectively, both internally and externally. It's a fascinating story, one that's worth watching closely in the years to come.
It certainly is. This deep dive has given us a lot to think about.
Yeah, me too.
It's a reminder that the world is constantly changing, and we need to stay informed if we want to understand the forces that are shaping our future.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
It's been a truly enlightening conversation.
I'm glad we could do this.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Until next time, keep exploring.